Well, Sarita, thank you again for joining us this year at Aspire. Sarita was part of our panel as in the keynote speech that was really fantastic and really kicked off 2019 with a bang, and she was gracious enough to come back. So thanks for joining us again.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So Sarita and I have had this really good conversation over the last couple of years and have noticed a lot of affinity really. And you'll notice the strange title of this session. It really comes from what we wanted to highlight, which is more than anything else, we have an affinity between our organizations about pragmatism, that it's wholly unsatisfactory really to be talking about problems without mobilizing to make those problems get better and to make progress as an industry. So we wanted to highlight that, and it was kind of cute. We in discussing this, Sarita, I mentioned that we use the expression around here, so what, now what? Okay, there's a problem, so what, now what? And you mentioned you had a similar one, which is a little bit more cosmopolitan. Can you talk about that?
Well, often people will hear at the end of a pretty hefty presentation about what are the challenges and what are the opportunities, and then you pause and, okay, now guys, this is when you ask yourself, ¿y qué? It's all very interesting, but what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, exactly. That's fantastic. Okay, so that's the background for the kind of the silly little title we have today. But this is a really an exciting partnership, and this is a partnership that Ad Astra has already committed to moving forward into 2021 because we just find it so foundational to what we're trying to accomplish with our mission and our why as an organization. So again, thanks for joining us, and just wanted to talk a little bit about the basics to start out with, and why why we all need to care about this.
Absolutely. So, Tom, the exciting thing about this conversation is that it shares what has been an authentic alignment and connection between us as professionals and between our teams, and that has to do with a country's most precious resource, its human resource. When Deborah Santiago and I co-founded Excelencia in Education in 2004, the discussion about demography was there, and it's still here, but the qualitative difference in what you and I are going to do in this conversation is, yes, we're going to look at demography, and we're right now in the middle of a census. And so let's look at it. And that has to do with the talent base. And that means let's look at our people. And I really want to emphasize, even as I start to walk us through this slide, that we are talking about a Latino student population that emanates from US born permanent resident people. There are a lot of the discussion about Latinos, particularly that which has been volatile, is about immigration, and that's
Right.
an important dimension. But this is really about who is in America now, who is in our classrooms, who is available for this country's human capital workforce. So when we look at the demography today, pre-K, 0 to 5, 1 in 3 children in America is Latino. When we look at the K-12 population, 1 in 4 is Latino. And when you look at higher education, even though it should be much greater, it is still quite substantial.
Right.
1 in 5 students is Latino. So for higher education, as and we are in the sector that is all about taking people who aspire to doing things with their lives and recognize that a degree of some kind, a credential, a degree is essential. That's where we are aligned from the very beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had another conversation this morning with a gentleman from NACUBO, the National Association of College Business Officers, and NACUBO Consulting. One of the things that they're working with schools on is the kind of the revenue crisis that stems from essentially a demographic crisis in this country, where the kind of the unfortunate convergence of two facts that One is that our industry is increasingly becoming more and more tuition dependent. And two is that the overall demographic situation of students of college age, quote unquote, and we're going to talk about that a little bit too, but that demographic situation doesn't look very rosy. So there's a survival thing here in addition to just a doing the right thing kind of a lens, correct?
There is, but I think that the other way that you and I have talked about it is the leadership thing as well, because enlightened self-interest is what many of us have assumed for a long time would organically, naturally lead professionals in the higher education sector to look at this opportunity, because that's what we're seeing on this slide, great opportunity, and to
Absolutely.
respond to it. But that response has been very, very slow.
Yeah.
And that's really the chemistry, if you will, between our organizational interests, because it is how do you respond to this population, which is portrayed in this demography as Latino, but it's really how do we respond to America's students who are seeking to advance their lives with education.
Well, and that's actually a great transition, I think, to what is at the heart of this discussion, which is the equity gap in terms of completion, right? And ultimately, I think we all feel like higher education is great on a lot of different dimensions, which is why we've devoted our respective careers to the service of this industry. Um, but ultimately, I think we would agree that transformation to a large extent is predicated on completion. Can you talk a little bit about that here relative to kind of the Latin context?
Sure. So the nature of the trajectory since 2004 to today, 2020, is that our organization is known in public, in media, definitely among people who are looking at the rate of change as as an information source. And so we have taken responsibility since 2010, as many in the public sector and in foundations took on this college completion view as a measure of success. And it's a very practical measure. When people enroll, they have an expectation they're going to actually get a degree, and then they're going to use their degree. And so a very practical way is saying, do they get it? Well, one of the things that we learned at the very beginning is that when you talk, again, as a country, about the country being first in the world with citizens having degrees, which is what a previous administration talked about, you had to look at Latinos. I mean,
Right.
that's where the relevance of what we just described. And yet, when we look within colleges and universities, very few, very, very few institutions have a rate of completion, for that matter, even retention for Latino students and
Right.
other students of color that is comparable with though with Anglo students who are the children of college educated parents.
Yeah.
And so that has been available as a framework, as a knowledge base for a while. What
Right.
is qualitatively different in 2020, in this moment in 2020, is that as
Absolutely.
a country,
Yeah.
we are not only talking about our needs right now as the higher education sector, we are talking about the needs of our country for recovery and for the future. And that's where an equity gap within any set of populations should be on the to-do list for every college and university. Because what we are seeking is to say, all right, we deliver well measured by success for these students, whatever those students may be. But this set of students who have sought their enrollment at our institution and come here because they believe that there's a good match, well, the diagnostic is not so much. And while it's been convenient, I'm an old recruiter, it's been convenient to say, well, it's not a good fit. Well, that's not going to work right now. You
Right.
can't, so you're going to get other students? No, these are our students. So
Exactly.
if you're in the higher education sector, you got to figure this one out.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of tension there. I've talked about this in the past, and to some extent, I need to be a little bit careful about this, which is, a risk of mine, as you know, is that sometimes I kind of charge into things with a little bit more passion than discretion. But um, you know, I wonder about this whole aspirational peer notion, right? Where institutions for years have focused as much or more on the group that are in the next tier up in terms of kind of academic cachet, let's say, compared to what they're actually doing, the students that they're actually serving. Do you find that there's a tension there that we need to be talking about or thinking about?
Yes, I mean, to just say it in a very global kind of way, the traditional model of higher education does serve a proportion of today's students super well. And I am traditional enough to have utmost respect for, we can quibble if it's the 150 or if it's the 75, the Research One institutions. I
Right.
have total admiration for the staying power of those models and the capacity to grow the academy, to produce doctoral recipients, those with professional degrees. Absolutely. That we know how to do. But the delivery of a learning environment where students who are seeking credentials and degrees and want to take what the academy has and apply it to their own lives, to enrich their families, to enrich their communities, to enrich this country. Our rhetoric is far ahead of our practice. And that's where I think we are as a sector today,
Yeah.
and where Excelencia is really excited to be working with you and with people who are saying, yeah, but this is something we can figure out,
Yeah.
because it's really a question for the leadership of institutions or within institutions, programs and colleges. Really, what are you prepared to do, you on your watch, to close this equity gap?
Yeah, that's great. And one of the big things you guys do, and I know your CEO and co-founder, Deborah Santiago, has really been a big proponent of research, and that's kind of her background. And a lot of what you do is some really impressive research on this space. Can you talk a little bit about some of these key numbers that? And I know this is just a kind of skimming off the cream off the top, if you will, in the very, very rich and varied research that you've done. But can you talk a little bit about some of this?
Sure. And this is definitely a place where you get into the Ike, because Deborah is definitely the backbone and the strength of our capacity to take gigantic data sets, whether it be iPads or NIPSAS, or whichever you want, and to then get it to clarity as it relates to, if you are within an institution, how do you make sense of it? And then how do you decide what you own? And so in this set of data, which is an excerpt from the most recent analysis that we released on Latino college completion, and hopefully people will get on our website and explore. It's a profile of 50 states, Puerto Rico, and the District of Columbia, as well as nationally. This gives you the Latino population, K-12, as well as the total population in terms of the proportions of people with degrees, with the proportion of America, which is 25% Latino versus the total population. The median age, which is for Latinos, we're a young population.
Right.
So the median age for Latinos is 30, whereas the median age for Anglos is 44. The 2-year graduation rate, again for Latinos, is a little bit lower, 33% versus 35% for whites. And the 4-year graduation rate, and even those words are a little bit of folklore, right? Because who
Yeah.
graduates for 2 years and 4 years, but let's just keep with that, is 51% for Latinos and 63% for whites. This is a way that all of us can get on top of this big discussion, which is who is available in our country to come to our institutions. When they come, how are they faring? So if you're looking at this, let's say you're, you're comparing mentally, what is my institution's graduation rate with Latinos versus what the median is, or my four-year institution rate. You can take this data and unpack it, we hope, in very available ways because of our open source style. Everything that you see is available with no charge. We do ask you to tell us who you are so we can stay in touch with you, but it's
Right.
all available to you because our support comes primarily from foundations and wonderful sponsors who have made common cause with us. But the biggest thing about all of this is the reason we front loaded data, the reason we want to be the information source is we want to eliminate excuses. It's just not a question of not knowing. If you need to know more, we can even answer more. But it's not
Yes.
about the knowing, it's about it's the doing.
And this is a frame that I've heard you speak on. Actually, when we first met, I think you were presenting this slide to a group at the Hispanic Development Fund in Kansas City, um, and I was this was really what grabbed me, that we know a lot about the Latino student population, or more broadly, the post-traditional student population, and yet we're still using, by and large, traditional approaches and hoping that they're going to work for a post-traditional population. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Well, I can spend a long time on this slide, so I'm gonna do the highlights, and I hope that
Yes.
for those whose interests get piqued, that they know that there's a lot more here. So what this slide does is display for everybody the way conversations happen when you start talking about who changes and who has responsibility and what are the needs that have to get met. When this analysis was done, it was in the context of a Gates funded, pretty significant project that was about redesigning the delivery system of financial aid. For Excellencia in Education to even break that open and get into it, we had to start to deal with, so who are the students? Period. Just who are the students? And while we approach what we do with a Latino lens, which means that we start with what do we know about Latinos, and to be able to say anything about Latinos, you have to be able to say what is it for everyone to then be able to say something about Latinos. So what you see on the left-hand side is the traditional student profile, which is pretty familiar to, I think, most people who have a career in higher education.
Right.
And most of us would love for this traditional student profile to be the experience of our own children, the experience of people that we care about, that they assume the pursuit of college ready to take it on, that they go to a college or university full time, that they enroll right after they graduate from high school, they live on campus, they to complete their degree in 4 years, a 4-year degree. They have parents who have a college degree. Most of them are white, non-Hispanic, that they do not work while enrolled, and that they make the choice of where they're going to go to school based on the available financial aid, academic programs offered, and institutional prestige. When we talk to members of Congress, when we talk to people in the private sector, when we talk to folks, this is what they have in their heads as it relates to today's students. On the right-hand side, we have a category that we call post-traditional, because the students that are represented there, they're not non-anything. They're quite vibrant and strong and numerous.
Yes.
And they are characteristically quite different,
Yes.
that they may need some academic prep, that they go to community college part-time, that they enroll oftentimes while entering the workforce, that they live off campus with their parents and they have dependents. They take longer for a multitude of reasons. They're usually the first in their family to enroll. They are usually Latino or African American. They work 30 hours or more. And that's substantial. And we have years of data that tells us about the impact of that. And they make, going back to a word you used at the beginning of this, they make very pragmatic and practical choices.
Yes.
They look at the options that are available to them and they choose a place that says, this will work for me. What's always part of this conversation is when I go out to an audience and I say, so what do you think the ratio is? Or what do you think, how many? And we get all kinds of answers, and you already know the answer. The post-traditional student profile makes up 85% of America's students.
Yep.
That's a fact.
And what percentage of the institutions out there do you think are more optimized for post-traditional versus traditional students?
Now you're talking about you didn't want to be too controversial. So I'm not going to give you a number, but I'm going to say that Excelencia has the privilege of meeting a small number of institutions that know this and embrace this.
Well, that's a great segue here, isn't it?
So the way that we know this and are able to work with those institutions, thank you, Tom, is that for our years of service, we didn't start off by saying, let's look at institutions. We always want to build on strength. And the strength that we knew when Deborah and I launched the organization, and we started going from the Ike factor, because again, many people are very comfortable repeating information about equity gaps and then saying it again and saying it again, and they don't
Right.
do anything. And so we started with something that Deborah and I had first developed when we were still working in government in the Clinton administration. And it was really looking at programs that are showing evidence of effectiveness. And the idea is that anybody could ask themselves that question. You don't even have to participate in what we call examples of excelencia. You can ask yourself that right now. If you think about what's available on your campus, what do you know that seems to be particularly impactful? And why is it? And is it something that you could expand? And can you apply the tactics of engagement and recruitment of students and the retention of students, let's say in chemistry or in anthropology, to a different discipline? It is a way of thinking, but we realized we had to jumpstart this. So we created something called Examples of Excelencia. And we are so thankful to you, Tom, and to your team at Astra for saying, I like that. I like it so much. I'm going to be a sponsor. I'm going to support that. And
Right.
so for those of you in your audience who haven't seen, you can see you speak at our capstone for the 2020 Examples of Excelencia. But the point is, without going into all the detail, you see in this slide, there is an intake method. So every first quarter in 2021, we will announce the call for nominations. Anybody can nominate. And what you're nominating is something that you know exists within a college or university that is showing market impact, positive impact on the trajectory of success for Latino students. It can be anything. It can be the Cesar Chavez, whatever program, or it can be the outreach for civic engagement. The point is, you are noticing its impact and its positive effect. Then there is a process articulated in Excelencia where we take it in, we look at the profile, we work with the program people.
Right.
The process of doing all of that is also professional development, because the questions we ask you, they're the questions you have to answer to your department chair or to your vice president or to your external funder. The point is, you have to know what it is that you are assessing, and then why, even if it's speculation, you think it's having this effect. We curate all of this information to the point that there becomes a set of finalists. Those finalists are reviewed by an external committee. And then each year, until this year, we would bring people together in Washington, D.C., and we would announce it. This was our first virtual presentation. I'm still not quite over the, I mean, I'm so pleased that we can connect this way.
I do it well, yeah.
But you know, there's something about being in each other's company, and what we do when we announce them, and you saw it, Tom, we showcase the people, the students that are served by these programs.
Absolutely. And you know, my selfish, maybe not so selfish, my aspirational kind of dream here is that our partners will make up a big chunk of the examples of excellencia in coming years as we partner together. And because I believe, bias firmly admitted, that students being able to get the courses they need and accelerating time to completion is as big of as good of a horse to bet on as really any in this whole conversation. So we've got a little bit of time, and then we're going to have to wrap up for questions. But you also have programs where you're not just kind of looking at an individual thing that happened that worked that you want to try to scale elsewhere, but these are more systemic, institutional, kind of transformational pieces that you guys have seen work as well. Can you talk about the SEAL and the President's Group too?
Absolutely. So very well said. As much as we spend a lot of time and energy in the data, the analysis, evidence-based practices, Deborah and I got into this because we really want to get it done, and we want to get it done on our watch. So in 2014, we decided that what we could do was to facilitate a network of institutional leaders. I said this earlier, we have the privilege of working with them. So institutional leaders that have accepted our invitation to say, I am working to make my campus a learning environment where Latino students thrive. So in our network, we have over 110 presidents who accepted this invitation. And I'm pleased to say that they represent 5% of all the colleges and universities in this country, which is over 4,000. They enroll 1 in 4 all Latino students in this country, and they graduate 1 in 3.
That's awesome.
So if the question for any of us is, can you make a difference? Absolutely, you can make a difference. And as much as the network itself is vibrant and is having an impact, still the change that higher education has to engage in, has to. And now we go back to points you made earlier, to survive, to be relevant, to be useful, is a set of changes that have to go much faster. And so our vehicle for speeding that up is the framework for the Seal of Excellencia, which you see represented there. We have 2 cohorts. The second one was just announced last week in Washington, virtually. And there are now 14 institutions in the country that have demonstrated through a very hardy process. They were certified because of the submission of data, practice, and leadership that they truly serve. And for all of us who are looking at how to move through this time of uncertainty, which is going to be with us for a while, it still comes back to the value that we give through what we do to the students who come to our campuses, who seek to meet their goals, their educational goals, by enrolling and affiliating with our institutions. And so I think that this universe of the Presidents for Latino Student Success, and so we are always welcome. I mean, but our operating principle, we work with people who are ready to work with us.
Yes.
If we have to persuade you that this is important, that's okay. You go do what you, as my daughter would like, you go do you. We're going to go do us, and us is about having institutions respond to the opportunity that's before them.
Yeah, and we really see the overlap with what we're doing here in the framework that we've been talking about this morning, that, this is complicated work, but even just on the academic side of the house, if we focus on that, there are lots of moving parts that have to kind of come together for the financial sustainability of the institution, but more to the point of today, for the benefit of the students so they can make rapid progress. Students don't show up, the post-traditional student especially, to explore different things and maybe get a degree, maybe not. They show up because they want to get a degree, they want to get a better job, and they want to be able to take care of their families. And so for us, to really be able to meet those more diverse needs, it's about benchmarking where the opportunities live. It's about planning and all these different interconnected pieces in the academic enterprise. And then again, it's about execution. And so we want to talk a little bit about that before we move to questions. Really our common cause to serve students, it starts with data. So for us, again, it's benchmarking, it's understanding students' progress, their productive progress to completion that we call degree velocity, and we also want to increasingly be expecting institutions to provide us with broader data around race, ethnicity, gender, age, Pell, because we can't intervene if we can't measure this stuff.
Absolutely, and as we go rolling this out, this is the meeting of the minds. So the equity with the Latino lens is something I've already said. There is everything about what Tom just said available through the analysis that you'll find at Excelencia. The distinction is that we will start with Latinos, but we will look at everyone, and that is essential. Yes, opinions are important, but you really need to know your information.
Yes, and then we really want to be able to look at degree velocity gaps. We don't want to wait until the 6 year cohort has completed or not completed a 4 year degree, and then come back retrospectively 6 years later and say, "Oh crap, we haven't gotten any better yet." We want to be able to intervene along the way. We want to know every single academic term whether or not students are improving in their progress toward completion.
And the build momentum. I mean, this again, this is why you and I hit it off well, and we continue to do that
Yes.
because it is about intensity. You have to do it now.
Absolutely. And, you know, this really has to start with, I think, a gut check, like you were mentioning earlier. Why is your institution doing what they're doing? Why did you get in the business of higher education? Most people, I think, when they really ponder that question, they come back to this idea that students really can be transformed. Their whole lives, their whole family's lives can be transformed by higher education when higher education is meeting their needs. And so, we really need to be looking at that and rallying the troops to get better and to meet those needs versus rationalizing that, well, that's just the way we do things, right?
And the quality of the gut check is for everyone,
Absolutely.
because for faculty, for professional, for everyone, because the students who come to your institutions, they don't come there to fail. So if they are struggling, the question for all of us is, what's your social contract? Did you admit them because you thought they were going to make it? And
Right.
if they're doing everything, then how do you intervene? There are institutions, we've already talked about them, the 150, the 75, whichever one you want. Look to your left, look to your right, only one of you will be here. Okay, we know that model. That's not what this is about. That's not what
No.
America's transformation is about.
Yeah, and it's really, I mean, for us, I think what led us to you is this idea that we've kind of landed on, that we've been doing this for 25 years now because we see education as a way to transform lives, but ultimately that students, even post-traditional students that have more complicated lives and don't perfectly fit into the old model, they're just as valuable as the traditional student, and they need to be valued and educated in order for those lives to be transformed. So that really leads us to developing a plan, right? Developing a plan to get better at meeting the needs so that you can realize your mission, your why.
Mhm. And what you've heard me reference now, and for all that are curious about it, there is a tactical plan. There are ways that your listeners, your audience could say, okay, that sounds interesting. How would I involve myself? We could tell you, but it's super aligned. I mean, that is the secret sauce in this partnership. Much of what you help colleges and universities do is what many have said, I don't know how to bend the curriculum or the presentation of our availability or to make the campus open. You, because of what Ad Astra focused on, have available methods, strategies, tools that when the leadership, and I mean that at every level, says, we want to be that, nothing's going to get in your way. There are ways to do it and make your campus available.
Yeah, and speaking of nothing getting in your way, it really comes down to conviction at a certain point. These are hard problems. We would be the first to say that because we've been living in the middle of these crazy mathematical complexities around taking a schedule and aligning it to students and having students changing needs, changing the equation along with curriculum changes and regulatory changes and all kinds of other changes out there that schools are having to deal with. But we've got to do this with conviction. We can't say it's hard. We can't tire in the process. We've got to just keep charging ahead.
And again, this is the common cause quality, Tom, because the community of people that we are privileged to be part of are
Yeah.
people who take responsibility.
And
That's the exciting thing about higher education.
And you can learn more about Excellencia here. This is Excellencia's website. I would absolutely recommend that all of you spend some time doing some further research into what they do. And then we're going to turn this open to a conversation. We've got a little bit of time left where we can discuss this. But Sarita, thank you so much again. I mean, being very gracious with your time 2 years in a row now. You got a million things going on, but this is important stuff. And we really feel like moving the needle is where we need to be now. Is enough talking. Let's go.
Tom, as I said, we work with people who are ready to work with us. We make common cause with you, and it's a privilege. We're delighted to be here.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, and we look forward to a vibrant conversation.